All right, we're just going to give it a couple minutes here for people to pop in. Welcome to another episode of Divinely Guided, where I host conversations with a special guest on faith, religion, and spirituality, and kind of all of the different facets of what that means for folks. I've had conversations with people. I've had lots of conversations with people in relation to this topic that have very, very different perspectives and views. And it's been really cool for me to be able to learn a little bit about those things. Coming from a Christian background, I didn't have a lot of introduction to other ways to believe, to practice spirituality. And so it's been a lot of fun to get to learn a little bit more about things that maybe I hadn't really done much discovery in before. So I'm just waiting for our guest to join us. Hi, Genevieve. It's good to see you here. Happy Sunday. How are you doing? Thanks so much for stopping in. I've just chugged a bunch of coffee. Just put the sweater on, but taking it off. Alrighty. How's everybody else doing this Sunday? It's really good to see you. I basically just woke up a few minutes ago. I am recovering from COVID. I am just at the tail end of my isolation period, and I'm feeling a lot better. I had like a really bad fever for a while and was having a hard time even getting up and moving around and stuff. It hit me pretty hard despite being vaccinated and all that. So be really careful out there, people, because COVID is no joke. So while we wait for our guest to pop on, I guess I can entertain. I'll be right back. All right. So sorry to hear. Oh gosh, yeah. So you had COVID as well. Not very fun. And that was probably before, was that before vaccines? I don't know. I feel like since COVID started, I have no concept of time at all whatsoever. I wonder if... Nope, that won't work. Okay. Why is this happening? There we go. Cool. Hi, Sophie. Hi, Chris. It's good to see you both. So I'm just waiting for today's guest to pop in here, and then we'll get rocking on our conversation. Not sure where he is, but until then... Oh, there we go. There he is. Cool. Great. So, for those of you who do not know, I will come back on and play some music later. For those of you who don't know, this is an episode of Divinely Guided, where I host conversations on faith, religion, and spirituality, and all of the different facets of that. I've had a lot of conversations with folks who are deconstructing from Christianity, and I really wanted to kind of branch out from that space and learn more about different spiritual practices that maybe I'm not used to, haven't been introduced to before, but have a lot of curiosity about. And I know that there are a lot of people that follow me who are also interested in learning more about those things. So today, my special guest is Travis Sanders, and he is somebody who practices mediumship and psychic services, and he'll tell you a lot more about that. Something that's I found really interesting is that he was on a show on A&E about psychic children. He's written a couple of books on these topics, and so I'm just really excited to talk to him about his own kind of personal journey with whatever spirituality is to him. So we're going to ask him lots of questions, and I'm really excited for this one. I'm going to bring him on. Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you, buddy?
I'm well. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me
Perfect.
okay? See
Yes,
me
perfect.
okay? I like
Yeah,
your background. It's super trippy.
thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I super appreciate it. Like I was saying, I know that there are a lot of people who are particularly curious about this.
Yeah,
Speaking for myself, I'm somebody who was raised Christian, grew up in the Christian faith. And so for a lot of my life, it was very like, you don't look into any of this stuff at all ever. It's bad. And it was very, very taboo. And now I'm in a space where I'm no longer a Christian and I'm very interested in learning about different spiritual practices and all the things that I kind of feel like I missed out on learning about.
right.
Um, for people who don't know you at all, just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, what kind of services you offer.
Yeah, for sure. So obviously I'm Travis, and I identify as a spiritualist. I work
Cool.
as a psychic and a medium. I've been doing that since I was 16, um,
Wow.
publicly, professionally. I'll be
Cool.
33 tomorrow, so that'll tell you how
Wow.
long
So that's like
that's
half
been.
your life.
Yeah, pretty much. And
Cool.
I grew up actually. I don't know what particular denomination you came from, but I grew up in an evangelical background myself. I grew up
Okay.
in the uh, deeply rooted in the Pentecostal church, and
Wow.
it right. It was just something that
Huh.
never really resonated with me. Um, and I was always one of those people who, especially as a kid, well, even now, but like you tell me I shouldn't do something, so it makes me
Hmm.
want to do it. So all of those
Yeah.
things that we weren't supposed to look at or learn about, I wanted to know about. So
Hmm.
my like delving into things like esoterics and the occult and stuff probably started in like those middle school years where people like to dabble. Um, but I've always been super sensitive and I've always been just highly intuitive. And it wasn't
Hmm.
until I started working with those materials that I realized it was more than just what some people, I guess, may see as like a baseline intuition. And I
Hmm.
had a pretty good um, knack for knowing things and learning how to get to that information sort of at will.
Hmm.
And I realized I could do these things. And
Hmm.
when I would read things, be it biographies or autobiographies and histories, and read these experiences that other people had, I realized that one, these were very similar to a lot of my own experiences, but two, apparently not everybody else saw things, heard things, felt things. I just assumed everybody perceived the world in the same way that I
Hmm.
did.
Hmm.
So that kind of sent me on a path of searching, and then I started doing readings and stuff. And it was very shortly after that there was that TV show that you mentioned, and that kind of
Yep.
launched a career.
Hmm.
So like in high school and freshly out of high school, a lot of other kids are kind of figuring out what they want to do to their life. And I guess I feel very blessed in the way of I've always felt like I've known what my purpose is. So
Cool.
I was like, guidance counselor, I don't need to go to college. I'm going to talk to dead people. It's fine. I've got this figured out. We're good.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you were a kid and just realizing that you had these abilities, and I guess you wouldn't have perceived it that way. You thought that everybody else perceived the world in the same
Yeah.
way. So when you say that I perceived these things, what are these things? Like, what was it that you were perceiving that you now can look back on and be like, oh yeah, not everybody sees those things.
Well, I've always been very visual, and
Mm.
um, so one, I assumed everyone thought in pictures, which I found is not the case. And even for those who do see in pictures, I just assumed that people got pictures about things that they didn't know about. So when I would
Mm.
get these little movie trailers in my head that would give me information, I assumed that's how everyone's brains worked. If I saw color around people, I assumed that's everybody saw that, or
Mm.
um, just kind of going through the world with this sense of like, well, how don't you know how that person feels? Don't you feel
Mm.
that? That's obvious. So that
Mm.
was a bit of a I don't know if you call it a shock, but it was definitely a wake
Yeah.
up call
Yeah.
as far as how
No
I perceive
kidding.
the world.
Yeah. So when you said you grew up in like a pretty like fundamentalist Christian home, how did people in your family and community perceive these things?
It's interesting. So I really kind of dove in the deep end around 16, 17. And that was the
Mm-hmm.
same time that I left the church. Um,
Hmm.
kind of around those middle school times, it was more like a secret study or a secret endeavor. And by that point, my mom was like, listen, you clearly have always been different. You're doing your own thing. You don't have to go anymore. So I was like, I'm going back to bed
Cool.
on Sunday. So my parents have been great in that aspect. My dad's not really religious. I guess I would say he's more agnostic, but my mom is still
Okay.
um, very involved in the church. But because of experiences she had with me, I think that kind of gave her permission to say, I don't understand this, but I know that there's something here. So I'm going to
Mm,
support it and trust that I've given you the foundation I think you should have. What you do with that's up to you.
yep.
So I never really had to deal a lot with like backlash from church members and church community and
Cool.
stuff, just because I haven't been back.
Yep.
But my family, even though they aren't really metaphysically minded or anything, have always been very supportive, even if they don't understand it.
Cool. That's really cool. I think something that's been really interesting for me, obviously being in and amongst other Christians, whether now ex-Christian or still practicing faith, is that when it comes to the metaphysical and that whole realm, either like learning about those things really like causes them to leave their religion, or it actually will strengthen their religious beliefs.
Yeah.
What is your opinion in terms of like how religion and spirituality, because a lot of people will view those things as very separate things,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of people will also view them as very interconnected. Um, what is your opinion on how interconnected metaphysical that whole realm of things is to, say, Christianity, if at all?
I don't think they're as dissimilar as people think.
Hmm.
Anytime you have any sort of um, religion or philosophy, people are just simply seeking to understand the divine in whatever way makes sense for them. And so,
Totally.
be it, like especially in Renaissance periods and stuff like that, there was a whole trend of things like mystic Christianity, and it sort
Hmm.
of revived around the time when spiritualism came into the picture in the Victorian era. So I can take, like, I still have a Bible on my shelf. I'm grateful
Hmm.
that I have that background, because someone can read something one way and that can be their interpretation and their truth, but I can read this and say, through my lens of spiritualism or mediumship or metaphysics, is the transfiguration on the mount, was that
Right.
something, or was that what in physical mediumship we call like literal transfiguration, or was that an activation of the chakras, or was that the aura that was
Right.
being perceived? So I don't think that they have to be separate. I think a lot of people who have certain experiences that their spirituality and their religion go hand in hand and are strengthened by each other have kind of found a way to step out of the dogma of things.
Mm.
I think that where the religion thing can really take people sort of into a place of stagnation is when there's no room for anything but literalism, and no
Yes.
room for sort of the inspiration of their own experiences.
Yeah, totally. I like this comment here. I'm a former Christian pastor that left the church after my first interaction with the Spirit, which I think is a very common um, experience. A lot of people are like, yeah, I experienced God or the Spirit or the divine after I left the constraints of religion or theology, literalism, like you said. That's super, super huge. And I think that's many people's stories. So I'm very interested to know. So how old were you when you went on the TV show?
I just turned 19.
Okay, wow. So that must have been quite an experience for somebody who's sort of just budding, still in your teen years and figuring yourself out. Did you find your TV show experience, first of all, like how was that experience in general? But did you find that it was like a good representation of how you define yourself spiritually, or was it kind of exploitative? Like, how was that experience as a young person being on TV talking about your gift?
As a whole, and because I was one of the older, or maybe even the oldest of the participants, a lot of the other kids were, single digits to tweens.
Yeah.
I think I went into it with a little bit more of an understanding of this is going to be television.
Mm,
And so I knew what I was getting into, I think. And so for me, overall, even though there are elements of how things were edited and portrayed that I think was sensationalized and a little bit on the
yeah.
fear-based spooky side, which I'm not a fan of, but
Mm,
overall, I think it was a good, fairly good representation. And I think the intention of the show to sort of help these kids and make them not feel like freaks was a really good thing. I think for maybe some of the younger kids, it was a bit exploitative,
yeah.
and a lot of what I saw too was, like this is a weird analogy, but like back in the '80s and the '90s, you can kind of see it was almost like trendy to have your black friend, and then in the
Right.
2000s, it's like trendy to have the token gay friend, and then it almost seemed to get to this place a few years ago where it was like trendy to have a psychic kid. And so I think that a lot of the kids, it was more for the parents' gratification than it was
Sure.
for the kids getting help and receiving
Yeah.
validation. But overall, it was a good experience.
Cool. That's very cool. So I don't believe that I can recall anyway that I've seen the show. So
Mhm.
like, do they like show you in your practice? Like what is the kind of like, obviously I know that they talk about um like your abilities and whatnot, but in what kind of lens do they come from?
So a lot of times, because kids don't understand what they're feeling, seeing, sensing, there's a lot of fear-based stuff. And
Hmm.
so a lot of the intention of the show is to kind of give a little bit of a backstory about these kids, but bring in mentors that can kind of help them control and harness those things so they're not feeling so much like a victim of it, and then sort of putting them in circumstances that allow them to prove to themselves that they are capable and
Okay.
able to kind of deal with those things.
Right. Do you think that sometimes having these type of abilities becomes like, because when you say kind of like um, having the ability to control or hone in those abilities, do you think that that should be the goal, and that maybe too often people are like, how do I use this as a capitalistic venture rather than something that's explorative and can like benefit society in a different way? Not that I think, like, I think that it's okay to use your abilities for capitalist ventures, but do you
Mm.
think that that maybe is sometimes too much the focus?
It's so like in specific regard to kids, I think a lot of times what I would do, and there are certain times because of that show that people will bring their kids to me, and depending on the age, sometimes it's just learning how to shut it off. I don't
Mm,
want, because especially when your body's growing, depending on what age they are, they may be going through puberty. There's all these changes happening already, and throwing like energy and dead people and stuff into the mix, I don't think is always the best thing at that time. So we'll be like,
yeah.
okay, these are your problems. These are how we can sort of deal with this. And if you want to explore and dive into this later, we can.
Right.
Um, I think that in and of itself, when we psychic, the word psychic means of the soul. And so I think
Mm,
that everybody has a connection to their own psychic intuition. Everybody can develop that. That's not anything special or unique. And
hmm,
so by doing that, I think we can have a deeper understanding of ourself and our relation to the world and our idea of God and the whole meaning
yep.
of whatever all of this is about. But especially within the past few years and with things like TikTok and the internet and stuff like that, there's so much information out there. There's so much wrong information out
Yeah.
there, and a lot of people do see it as, I'm going to buy this oracle card deck and start pulling cards on lives and charging money for readings, instead of seeing that
Totally.
there's sort of a spiritual application for it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I see that all too well too. And I think that for people, like me who maybe don't know a lot when it comes to that kind of stuff, that it can get, especially people who are particularly curious, it can get dangerous and very easy to fall into just assuming that, there are people who have credentials that they don't, or who have abilities that they don't, or who don't hold those things as being sacred, which I think is really important when it comes to spiritual practices is the intention. And like you said, like I personally, I do believe that everybody has psychic abilities, being it intuition, and that it's sort of a matter of how well you nurture those things. And I think childhood is a very good indicator of that, is like how well you were nurtured in your ability to be imaginative and intuitive and sensitive as a child.
Absolutely.
So for people who want to tap more into those intuitive and psychic abilities, how do you think, like, what do you think the best ways to nurture that is?
Yeah, absolutely. There's two things that I always tell people. One is, a lot of people say they want to develop that sixth sense, but we don't even
Mm,
utilize the five senses we already have. And so
mm,
sometimes the very simple and boring things, like, are you really taking in what your eyes are seeing? Are you
mm,
really hearing what's being said? Um, how often can we meet someone, have a conversation with them, and I could be like, well, what color shirt did they have on?
mm.
What those are all things, information our brain is taking in, but we're only choosing to process certain pieces. And so really just working with the senses, and I guess we would call it becoming aware or becoming mindful, can do so much more than you need this crystal and you need to burn this
Yes.
herb during this moon phase or whatever. The other thing I
Yeah.
always tell people is, you can't, so once you're really sort of becoming aware of those senses and the information that's already there right in front of your face, we can't really begin to know spirit or energy or whatever you
Mm,
want to call it if we don't know our own first.
yeah.
And so, really going within, what do I feel like? What do I
Mm,
think? What do I think is my soul? What do I think is my spirit? Are they the same? Are they the different? Um, I do this exercise sometimes when I teach classes where I have people go within and I'll ask them questions like, if your soul was a color, what would it be? If you could lick your
mm,
soul, what would it taste like? Does it
yeah.
have shape? If you could hear it, what
Mm,
would it sound like? And really, once we start to know the self, then we can start to be more accurately perceptive of the things around us.
right. Yeah. I think totally. And I think that a lot of like culture right now, especially, promotes this idea of your problems will be solved by this external thing. And so a lot of people are like, what can I buy that will solve my problems and teach me about myself? Or make me feel connected to other people? Or what's this, one single practice that will crack the code of me? And I mean, I still fall into that pattern. I think it's human nature for people
Oh
to
yeah.
fall into that trap. But pretty much like every therapist that I've seen for forever has just been like, dude, meditate, sit in silence, and just be in this moment. And I'm like, no, 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 no. I'll take whatever the other external garbage is, because I think that's really hard for people, especially right now when um, there's a lot of ugliness, I think, that goes on in all of us in terms of like, I know that depression and anxiety is running super high for people. And so we're on a rise of like trying to seek out these things that are beyond us, and that can get super, super dangerous. So I'm curious. You say that you see dead people, and for me, I'm like, it's already overwhelming for me to see alive people around me sometimes.
Right.
So I can only imagine that like, what was your first experience with that like, and were you aware that that's what was happening, and sort of like how has that particular thing um, evolved over being younger and realizing that you had this ability to like now knowing that this is a thing, and like how do you deal with that? Yeah.
It's funny. I don't really, so like when I perceive the spirit world, and it's a little bit different now than it was earlier, I don't ever really see them,
Okay.
which sounds backwards because I'm clairvoyant and seeing is how I get a lot of the majority actually of my information. So I could be doing a session with someone and describing their loved one and things like that. And they could show me a picture when the session was over, and I would have no idea that that's who I was talking to. Um, because
Okay.
I just don't really perceive a body so much. Sometimes they may show me particular features if they had, like a very distinct nose or a very specific color hair or whatever. I
Mm,
may get like little close-up snapshots of that. Um, but very rarely will I ever see a figure. So I don't have to be like walking down the street and, you know, like the kid in
Like
the
the
sixth.
ghost
Just
whisperer.
not,
Yeah.
yeah, that's not been my
Yeah.
experience. When I
Yeah.
was younger, and the other thing too that's kind of funny is the communication with spirit didn't really start coming in until later. It was more of that
Mm.
psychic stuff first, and so I worked really strictly on just sort of that intuitive level before I ever started being comfortable um, offering that communication to people with their loved ones. When I was younger, though, I did have a little bit more in your face or objective experiences. And
Mm.
so the real first thing that I remember is when I would lay in bed, I would just sort of see silhouettes standing around my
Mm.
bed. And sometimes I
Mm.
would see these like little streaks or fireflies of light in my room if it was really dark and things like that. And it wasn't that, how am I trying to say this? I didn't doubt what I was seeing, but at the
Mm.
time I was worried if what I was seeing was real or not. Like there
Yeah.
was always this fear of like, am I mentally ill?
Mm.
Because I know that it's there, I'm looking at it, but is it
Yep.
a hallucination or whatever?
Mm.
Um, but it never really scared me outside
Mm.
of questioning my own sanity. There was never anything that was so spooky or uncomfortable or negative like you see in a lot of the TV shows. And you know, you hear some people
Right.
talk about having these negative experiences, and that's never been my experience of the spirit world.
Cool. Did anybody else ever question your sanity?
Not that they've ever openly admitted to me.
Okay. Well, that's good.
I mean, well, I know that at one point my mom told me, and this was years after I'd been doing this work, but she told me that when I was a kid, um, she was highly considering taking me to a psychologist. But it was because she didn't know what was going on for a long time before I opened up. And it was because I was dealing with such severe anxiety and panic
Mm.
attacks that she thought, like in her mind, I think that she thought that someone abused me or,
Mm.
you know, some other trauma happened. But yeah, so when I was finally able to kind of communicate these things that I was seeing, I don't know, maybe she still thought I was crazy, but luckily, a lot of those formative experiences that I had after I kind of opened up to her were things that were able to be either confirmed or at least validated
Cool.
within a little bit of time. So it showed her
Right.
like, okay, there's something going on, even if I don't know what this is.
Yes. Yeah, I do. And I do think that sometimes humans diagnose things as insanity simply because they don't understand them. And there are things that go on in the world that are way too vast for people to understand. I think that we would benefit from an acceptance of like that we don't have the science to explain everything and that that's okay. And that's what makes the world as beautiful as it is. So my friend Jared just sent in a question for you. He says, I find humanity desires control. I've seen this show up in religions, like Christianity personally, in trying to forge out equations to control the unknown. Does this battle against control show up in the world of psychics at all? Or in a healthy way, can this hang up be avoided?
Mm, that's an interesting question. Um, I'm not sure quite how that translates to sort of this world in and of itself. I know that people have always sought power through whatever means
Yep.
necessary, and there's some really interesting history. I think going back to the 60s and 70s with the U.S. government, like during Cold War times, putting a lot of money into investigating things like remote viewing and stuff like
Yeah.
that. You know, Hitler was very into the occult and trying to use occult knowledge as a leg up during
I
the
didn't know
World
that.
War.
Hmm.
So I think people have always tried to exploit it in that way, but I don't think that they get very far with it because if you have, you know, say like nuclear power or anything science or concrete or tangible, it's very formulaic. So it's like you do this and
Hmm.
this is the result that happens, but you can't really um, replicate in a lab these sort of subjective perceptions. And
Yes.
so I think that they may start to kind of go in that way a little bit and then give up.
Yeah, totally. I think that's the danger of things that are spiritual is sometimes they can be the danger and the excitement is that they're so easy to exploit because it's not tangible or provable. And so a lot of people will use people's curiosity as an avenue to get their money or to get them to follow them. And so that I mean, I've seen that most exercised in Christianity. Like,
Yeah.
Christians should not be the most wealthy people in the world, yet they are.
No. Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I'm curious, you said you've been doing this professionally, basically, like I said, half your life. How, like, so if I were to sit down in a session with you, what would that look like? So, like, what do people access your services for, first of all, I guess?
So when people come to me, I always like to know what their intention is, because
Hmm.
it really tends to go one of two ways. Either they want to know about them, their life, their potential futures, or they want to connect with someone on the other side. And
Hmm.
I don't even want to know, like, in the beginning, who or what anything is about. I just want to know where you want to go, because it's a little bit of a different mindset that I work in. And if people don't specify, I'll automatically just start to go in psychic. So if it's spirit communication, I like to know when they sit down that that's what they want to focus on. So I'd probably ask you, is this about you? Is this about looking at someone who's passed? If
Yeah.
it's more about you, I try to hit all of the main areas of a person's life, and I've learned how to sort of, which is a weird way to describe it, but throw my awareness into those different areas of a person's life. So I try to make sure that I hit those major points, like health and career and relationships, and
Hmm.
the qualities that they have, just based off of whether it be looking at the auric field and what that means for them, or what might be going on in their life, and then looking at if there's potential futures that they want to look at. If there's
Hmm.
questions, clarity that they want, I welcome that. When it comes to the mediumistic aspect of it, once someone says, okay, I want to go into the direction of connecting with someone who's passed, some people they already know who they want. And that's like the
Yeah.
only person that they want. And I always tell people, I have no control over that. I'm
Yeah.
usually pretty good at getting who we're looking for, in which case they'll show like a photo or an item or something. But that doesn't mean that you want to get Uncle Bob and Aunt Lucy's going to come through first. And then Uncle
Right.
Bob might come in a little bit later. And then there's other people who are just like, I've got a bunch of dead people, so whoever comes in, comes in which case I just kind of open my awareness to that spirit level and just say, anybody who wants to come in that has some communication for this person, just come in and speak loud and be clear. And,
Hmm.
we kind of talk about mental health and stuff like that. There's a real fine line, I think, between gifted and crazy. And that's why
Hmm.
being grounded is so important, because I've often described the mediumistic state as me giving myself permission to be schizophrenic for 30 minutes at a time.
Hmm.
Because
Interesting.
I have sort of a rule with myself that in that 30 minutes or 45 minutes or however long their session is, I have an agreement that if I feel it, if I sense it, if I hear it, if I see it, taste it, smell it, whatever, I will give voice to it. And it
Hmm.
doesn't mean that I have to understand it. It's great if I understand what they mean, but sometimes I'm just
Yep.
like, this is what I'm seeing. I have no idea. This isn't a symbol that I normally have. Do you understand this in a literal way?
Hmm. Cool. Very cool. Does that ever get, so for me, like, I think about, because I would say I would describe myself as a very empathetic person. And so I think that that can become like emotionally draining at times. And so when I
Mm.
think about the kind of work that you're doing, do you ever feel like spiritually, mentally, emotionally drained from taking on so much of other people's stuff all the time?
More so the psychic side of it, actually. And
Okay.
I think sometimes people think it would be the other way around, because when it comes to death, you're dealing with heavy grief.
Yep.
But like, if I do, say I have 5 readings in a day and I do 5 psychic readings back to back, by the end of the day, I'm like, don't talk to me. I can't think. Don't ask me
Yeah.
anything. I'm exhausted. Um, Mediumistically, there's something sort of counterintuitive about when you're in that energy of spirit. It's almost like plugging yourself into a telephone, or plugging your cell phone in to be charged. So
Hmm.
there's some aspect of it where I think can be a little mentally tiring because you're holding space for people, and there's usually pain within that space for them that we're trying to work through because they're dealing with the loss. But at least on a physical level, I find it less draining than working psychically.
Right. Okay. Yeah. In your opinion, when people do have a session with you, what is it that they usually walk away from that they didn't, or that they walk away with that they were seeking or maybe didn't have before?
A lot of times, if it's more of a reading about them, it's interesting because they may get those nuggets and they may get some predictions if I feel very confident in that. But a lot of people say, thank you because you validated what I already knew. And I
Hmm.
think that as a society as a whole, we don't take into consideration our own intuition, or we do, we're aware of it,
Yes.
but then we dismiss it and discredit
Hmm.
ourselves. So it just sort of gives confirmation to maybe things they already felt or knew. And of
Yeah.
course, when you're dealing with spirit communication and mediumship, my goal is to have that person walk away at least feeling like they've been able to process something. Ideally, I love it. I love, and I wish every session would be that a person comes in and they walk away knowing that life continues after physical death. And some people
Hmm.
feel that way, and that's always a good feeling for me when that happens. But I can't ever prove anything to anybody concretely.
Of course.
So at least if I can give them some sort of information that there's no way anybody would have known but the person who's supposedly talking to me, then at least it get one should make them feel a little bit better, but two, get them thinking. And that to me
Hmm.
is like the point of what I do. A lot of people are like, it's about healing, and yeah, it is about healing, but I talked about being a spiritualist and the whole spiritualist movement that came about during the Victorian era. And some people see it as just a movement or a philosophy, but it is a sort of a religion, or organized religion, even though I'm not really religious. And for
Yep.
me, it's not communication with what they call the so-called dead that is the most important thing. It's that if we can take that personal individuality continues after this thing that we call death, what does that mean for us here? How is that going to change
Hmm.
how we view the world here? How is that going to change how we live our life here?
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm currently reading a book by Ernest Becker, a philosopher, called The Denial of Death. And it basically just talks about all of the ways that humans cope with the fear of death. And like one of those things, having created religion or different patterns of belief that are conducive to there being an afterlife for the sake of feeling, I guess, safety and knowing that even after we die, that there is something. But
Mm-hmm.
also how that those beliefs can take away from us understanding the value of this life. Because, I mean, in my own personal experience, I've heard a lot of Christians say, well, whatever happens in this life doesn't really matter because it's the life after this that matters the most. And I'm just like, to me, that feels sad because we're not valuing the time that we have now, and we're discounting that whether there is an afterlife or not, um, that this is life that is of value. So, what is your personal opinion? Like, do you believe that there's an afterlife? Do you think that we become ghosts that walk the earth? Do you think that there's like another realm that we go to? Do you think when it's done, it's done? I'm just curious to know your perspective on that.
My belief system is I absolutely believe in an afterlife. Um, and I think I have such a brain that likes to pick things apart and analyze them. And so I think it's
Mm.
ironic that I do what I do because in some way I think maybe like on a subconscious level I'm trying to prove to myself over and over again through those experiences that
Yeah.
yeah, there has to be. um, so I do firmly believe that there's life after this. Usually you'll hear mediums and spiritualists just call it the other side. um,
Mm.
to what exactly that looks like, I have ideas, but I don't
Yep.
know.
Of course.
And most of the time, 99% of the time in the session, they don't they don't share that stuff.
Mm.
I'm interested in that stuff. but that's not the stuff they want to talk about. They want to talk about the life they lived and the things that they wish they would have done, and then things they want to say to their loved ones. So every once in a while I'll get little nuggets about maybe what they're doing on the other side, and then I kind of go into that analytical brain of like, well, is that literal or is that symbolic as part of like validating their personality, stuff like
Yeah.
that. um, I think I think I believe in reincarnation in some form.
Mm.
I don't know exactly what I feel that to look like,
Yep.
but it's not one of those, like, if I lean in that direction, I'm not one of these people who believes it's like this mandatory endless cycle.
Sure.
One of the things that spirit has impressed upon me is that the other side, there's, you'll hear the phrase worlds within worlds. And
Mm.
so I can't really think that there's something as fantastic as an afterlife, but that we can put boundaries on it and a gate around it and be like, well, this is it for
Yeah.
eternity. So I
Yep.
always feel like to some degree the soul is going through some experience somewhere, continuing to grow and evolve.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah, I would totally agree. I always like, I feel very encouraged by people who are very in touch with the spirit world or spiritual leaders or what have you, when they are able to say, I have a lot of ideas, but I don't know and I can't prove it. And I think that
Right.
that speaks to intellectualism, and an understanding that we aren't supposed to have that capacity. Not that we're not supposed to, but that's the beauty of it. Like, how fucking boring would it be if we knew everything, right? And like,
Yeah,
we,
exactly.
yeah, and I think it's just so important. And I'm encouraged in hearing you say, like, um, given the experience that you have and that you help people in a very empowering and spiritual way. And this is something I wish that all of my pastors had done growing up, is just saying, you know what, I don't have that answer. I don't know for a fact that when you die, you're going to show up to a pearly gate and God's going to be sitting there on a throne. Like, it was like, that's for sure what's going to happen. And that to
Right.
me doesn't speak to somebody who's been explorative. Or I think something else that I find really interesting that you touched on was that you are actually a very like analytical and rational person as well. And I think a lot of people make the mistake that people who are very in touch with their spiritual side aren't interested also in theology or science or rationality, when it's usually quite the opposite. And I find the more that I explore like analytics of things and rationality, the more in touch I feel spiritually as well, and that they're not really separate things. And in a lot of cases, there are just too many people that are sitting on their high horse that are like, yeah, I have all the answers. And I feel sad for them in a lot of ways, because, and that's my main issue with religion, is that it stops people from asking questions. And when you assume you have all the answers, you don't look for new ones.
Mm-mm. No, not at all. And there's no growth within that. Like,
Yeah.
I'm a I'm a Capricorn. I'm a creature of comfort. I like my
Mm.
routine. I like to know what's going on. I want to have these concrete answers that I'll know I'll never have. Um, and so that's, and I think a lot of people are that way, human nature, but I also love too sort of the challenge of butting up against a belief system or having a brand new concept introduced that totally says, okay, now I have to reframe my whole paradigm,
Yeah.
because it's exciting. And even if you find that you end up back to the same conclusion, just that process of going through it, I think, sparks other ideas and other growth and other questions. And that's
Mm.
the beauty of it.
Yeah, totally. That's very cool. Yeah, I would agree. So for anyone who is in here hanging out with us, I invite you to, there's a little button here where you can ask questions, or you can drop it into the comment section. If you have any questions for Travis, we have just a few minutes here. So while we're still chatting, please feel free to ask questions. We have these discussions so that you can be involved and ask as many questions as I'm asking. Because I think that we all have the benefit of learning and growing when we ask each other these questions. So I was particularly excited to have this conversation with you, because this is not stuff that I have had a lot of opportunity outside of like popular media and TV shows on Netflix to kind of
Right.
learn about. And so what I want to ask you now is, so like there are shows, TV shows related to, so like for example, Long Island Medium. Do
Mhm.
you think that that is an accurate depiction of mediumship, or maybe just like a facet of it? Like, do you think that media does a good job in general of portraying your identification as a spiritualist?
So, well, and I'll just specifically go with Long Island Medium because that's what you brought up.
Sure.
I actually really like Teresa. I think she's a good
Cool.
medium.
Me too.
I've seen her work in person a
Oh,
few years
really?
ago. Yeah, she was in Ohio,
Wow.
so a friend and I went and
Cool.
watched her do her thing. The thing,
Sweet.
and I think for the most part, that show does a good job of showing what that whole world looks like.
Hmm.
Um, I think where there's disadvantage, so, and that's a good thing because it helps get it out to the masses. The only downside to something like a reality show like that is within mediumship, there's always going to be things that don't make sense in the moment. And sometimes those are the most important pieces because it might be a week or 2 weeks down the road until either what you said happens or the thing that the
Right.
medium said where you're like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And then grandma's like, well, yeah, no, that actually did happen. I have it right here, kind of a thing happens. And so that demonstrates that this person isn't just like psychically pulling information out of your head and feeding it back to you, that it's coming from an external place. And so I always say in a good reading, there's always going to be pieces that don't make sense. And so you
Hmm.
have these shows like Long Island Medium where I think her sessions are an hour long, but you're getting 3 minutes of that
Yes,
reading. They're highlighting the best pieces. And
of
so I
course.
think sometimes that can actually create an unrealistic expectation for people who go and seek out those things for themselves.
Right. That totally makes sense. So I found you under the hashtag queer spirituality.
Hmm.
And for me, it was really important to kind of highlight queer voices in the topic of this conversation because I think that people who are queer or trans sort of have the capacity to ask questions and understand sort of the magic of life in a way that's sort of unique and special.
Yeah.
And so I always get a unique host of responses to this question, but I feel like it's an important one to ask. Has your queerness influenced your spirituality or the way that you practice it?
1,000%. Um, I
Yeah.
kind of feel, and I've noticed a really interesting thing that, especially with, because this sort of world tends to be dominated by women. You think of a psychic,
Hmm.
you think of a middle-aged woman most of the time.
Totally.
That's changing.
Yep.
That imagery, I think, is changing over the last few years. But especially with men, you get a lot of gay men. You see readers on TV or male psychics. A lot of them tend to be queer in some form or fashion. And I think it's because, in some way, queer people, no matter how they identify, are sort of in this fringe area or
Hmm.
sort of in this liminal space. We're not
Yep.
quite in this box and we're not quite in this box. And that in itself is very metaphysical.
Hmm.
It's the crossroads, it's the intersection of life and death, it's the intersection of physical and non-physical. And so I think in a lot of ways, queer people are the embodiment of what some people might call that liminal space or that in
Hmm.
between. And so that's an aspect of it. I think in a lot of ways, because queer people face certain challenges that other people don't, it sort of teaches a certain degree of courage and making us be a little bit more self-aware and a little bit more comfortable in our own skin. And then the other thing too is I think it really helped to cultivate a sense of compassion.
Hmm.
That maybe I would have been that way had I been straight, but I think it's caused me to need to be very compassionate with
Yep.
myself, especially with my background, but then also be able to extend that compassion to other people.
Hmm. Cool. Cool. I really like that. So for people who are interested in working with you, how do they go about doing that, and what is the prerequisite of that?
All you have to do really is, I always tell people, browse through my website first, just Psychic Travis Sanders. I have videos and information and stuff on there just so they know
Cool.
what to expect. They can book a session right through that. There's links to a YouTube page where there are like educational videos on things like developing your intuition and stuff like that.
Cool.
I'm based out of North Central Ohio, so I teach classes locally if people want in-person stuff. I do Zoom stuff on occasion.
Cool.
And if you're in New York or Indiana, usually in the summers I teach, there's two spiritualist camps, one called Chesterfield in Indiana and Lilydale in New York. And it's basically a community, a town of mediums. And they do like summer workshop programs and stuff like that. So those are really cool places too, just for growth and education in general. But I tend to offer stuff there in the summer as well.
Awesome. Cool. And you've got your website link in your Instagram bio, correct?
Yes, and
I think,
I will
yeah.
mention really quickly is, I don't know how it happened. My Facebook page has been like hacked and I got kicked
Oh,
out of
no.
all control over it. So if anybody like tries to look up on Facebook, if whoever you message, it's not going to get back to me. So I'd
That
recommend
sucks.
just going through Instagram or my website.
Sure. Okay, good to know. So if you want to contact Travis, book a session, or just find out more about what he's doing, make sure you check out his website. It's in his Instagram bio to find out all of that good stuff. You're frozen right now, so we'll just give it a second to... Okay, awesome. You can hear me?
Yes.
Cool. So I want to thank everybody who took the time to be here with us today. For any of you who missed this conversation and you want to hear more of it or all of it, I will be posting it on my Instagram newsfeed so you can catch the whole conversation. Feel free to share it with your friends if you found it interesting. As always, you are welcome to DM me if you're interested in having a conversation like this, or you just want to chat. I'm always up for new connections with new folks. But yeah, thank you for taking the time. And Travis, thank you for taking the time to speak with a stranger on the internet to allow us the opportunity to learn.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed our conversation, and it was nice
Good.
to get to talk to you and see you in person. Not in person.
Yeah,
Face to
absolutely. Yes, sort of. Yeah.
Sort of, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, you too. So make sure, everybody who doesn't already, make sure please that you follow Travis. He's obviously doing some incredible things, and we have the opportunity to learn and grow as a result of knowing this awesome human being. So make sure you do that. Make sure you check out his website, find out more about what he's doing, what he's all about, and book a session if you are interested in doing so. So with that, I hope everybody has a great rest of your Sunday, and we will catch you next Sunday for another episode of Divinely Guided Conversations on Faith, Religion, and Spirituality with another special guest. Take care, everybody. Much love. See you next time.
Thank you. Have a good one.